I'm Jenny, and I'm going to be reading Animal Farm by George Orwell, Part 1 of Chapter 10. Let's start here. The seasons came and went, the short animal lives fled by. A time came when there was no one who remembered the old days before rebellion, except Clover, Benjamin, Moses the raven, and a number of pigs. Muriel was dead. Bluebell, Jessie, and Pincer were dead. Jones was dead. He had died in an indifference. To another part of country. Snowball was forgotten. Boxer was forgotten, except by the few who had known him. Clover was old Shoutmare, now stiff in the joints, and with a tendency to rehuman eyes. She had 2 years past the retiring age, but in fact no animal ever actually retired. The talking of setting aside a corner of the pasture for subterranean animals had long since been dropped. Napoleon was now a mature boar of 24 stone. Squirrel was so fat that he could with difficulty see out of his eyes. Only old Benjamin was much the same as ever, except for being a little grayer about the muzzle, and since Boxer's death, more remorse and taciturn than ever. There were many more creatures on the farm now, though the increase was not so great as though had been expected in earlier years. Many animals had been born, to whom the rebellion was only a dim tradition, passed on by word of mouth, and others had been bought, who had never heard mention of such things before their arrival. The farm posed 3 horses now beside Clover. They were fine, upstanding beasts, willing workers, and good comrades, but very stupid. None of them proved able to learn alphabet beyond the letter B. They accept everything that were told about the rebellion. Principles of animalism, especially from Clover, for whom they had almost final respect, but it was doubtful whether they understood very much of it. The farm was more prosperous now, and better organized. It had even been enlarged by 2 fields which had been bought from Mr. Pinkton. The windmill had been successful completely at last, and the farm possessed a threshing machine and a hay elevator of its own, and various new buildings had been added to it. Whymper had thought himself a dog cart. The windmill, however, had not after all been used for generating electrical power. It was used for milling corn and brought in handsome money profit. The animals were hard at work building yet another windmill. When that one was finished, so it was said, the Dionos would be installed, but the luxuries of which Snowball had once taught the animals to dream the stalls with electric light and hot and cold water, and the 3-day week were no longer talked about. Napoleon had denounced such ideas as contrary to the spirit of animalism. The trustiest, happiest, he said, lay in working hard and living frugally. Somehow it seemed as though the farm had grown richer without making the animals themselves any richer, except, of course, for the pigs and the dogs. Perhaps this was partly because there were so many pigs and so many dogs. It was not that these creatures did not work. After their fashion, there was as Squealer was never tired of explaining, endless work in the supervision, and or never tired of, and or gigantston of the farm. Much of this work was a kind that the other animals were too ignorant the understand for animals. Squealer told them that the pigs had to explain enormous labors every day upon mysterious things called flies, minutes, and mirganda. These were large sheets of paper which had to be closely covered with writing, and as soon as they were so covered, they were burnt in the furnace. This was of the highest importance for the welfare of the farm, Squealer said, but still neither pigs nor dogs produce any food by their own labor, and there were very many of them, and their appetites were always good. As for the others, their life, so far as they knew, was as it had always been. They were generally hungry. They slept on straw and drank from the pool. They labored in the fields. In winter they were troubled by the cold, and in summer by the flies. Sometimes the older ones among them racked their dim memories and tried to determine whether in early days of the rebellion, when Joan's exclusion was still recent, things had been better or worse than now. They could not remember. There was nothing with which they could compare their present lives. They had nothing to go upon except Squealer's list of figures. With involuntary, Demon found the problem insoluble. In any case, they had little time for speculating on such things now. Only old Benjamin professed to remember every detail of his long life, and to know that things never had been, nor ever could be much better or worse. Hunger, hardship, and disappointment being, so he said, the unusual, terrible law of life. And yet the animals never gave up hope. More, they never lost even for an instant their sense of honor and privilege of being members of Animal Farm. They were still the only farm in the whole country, in all England, owned and operated by animals. Not one of them, not even the youngest, not even the newcomers who had been brought from farms 10 or 20 miles away, ever ceased to marvel at that. When they heard the gun booming and saw the green flag fluttering at the masthead, their hearts swelled with imperialship pride, and the talk turned always towards the old heroic days, the expulsion of Jones, the writing of the Seven Commandments, the great battles in which the human invaders had been defeated. None of the old dreams had been abandoned. The republic of the animals, which Major had foretold when the green fields of England should be untrodden by human feet, was still believed in. Some days it was coming in midnight living, but still it was coming. Even the tune beasts of England was perhaps hummed secretly here and there. At any rate, it was a fact that every animal on the farm knew it, though no one would have dared to sing it out loud. It might be that their lives were hard, and that not all of their hopes had been fulfilled. But the hungry, but the hard, and that not all of their hopes and had fulfilled. But they were conscious that they were not as other animals. If they were hungry, it was not from feeding tyrannical human beings. If they work hard, at least they work for themselves. No creature among them went upon two legs. No creature called any other creature master. Animals are equal. One day in early summer, Squealer ordered the sheep to follow him and lead them out to a piece of waste ground at the other end of the farm, which had been overgrown with birch saplings. The sheep spent the whole day there browsing at the leaves under Squealer's supervision. In the evening he returned to the farmhouse himself, but as it was warm weather, told the sheep to stay where they were. It ended by their remaining there for a whole week, during which time the other animals saw nothing of them. Squealer was with them for the greater part of every day. He said, teaching them to sing a new song, for which privacy was needed. It was just after the sheep had returned on a pleasant evening when the animals had finished work and were making their way back to the farm building, that the terrifying neighing of a horse sounded from the yard. Startled, the animals stopped in their tracks. It was Clover's voice. She neighed again, and all the animals broke into a gallop and rushed into the yard. Then they saw what Clover had seen. It was a pig walking on his hind legs. Yes, it was Squealer, a little awkwardly, as though not quite used to supporting his considerable bulk in that position. But with perfect balance, he was strolling across the yard, and a moment later out from the door of the farmhouse came a long file of pigs, and they're walking on their hind legs. Some did it better than others. One or two were even a trifle unsteady, and looked as though they have liked the support of a stick. But every one of them made his way right round the yard successfully, and finally there was a tremendous baying of dogs and shrill crowding from the black corporal, and out came Napoleon himself, majestically upright, casting haughtily glances from side to side, and with his dogs gambolling round him. He carried a whip in his trotter. There was a deadly silence. Amazing, terrified, huddling together, the animals watched the long line of pigs march slowly round the yard. It was as though the world had turned upside down. Then there came a moment when the first shock that worn off, and when, in spite of everything, in spite of their terror, the dogs and of the habit developed through long years, if never complaining, never criticizing, no matter what happened. They might have uttered some words of protest, but just at that moment, as though at a signal, all the sheep burst out into a tremendous beating of 4 legs good, 2 legs better. 4 legs good, 2 legs better. 4 legs good, 2 legs better. For 5 minutes without stopping, and by the time the sheep had quieted down, the chance to utter any protest had passed, for the pigs had marched back into the farmhouse. Benjamin felt a nose nuzzle at his shoulder. He looked around. It was Clover. Her old eyes looked dimmer than ever. Without saying anything, she tugged gently at his mane and led him round to the end of the big barn, where the 7 commandments were written. For a minute or two they stood gazing at the tarred wall with its white lettering. "My sight is failing," she said finally. "Even when I was young I could not have read what was written there. But it appears to me that that wall looks different. Are the 7 commandments same as they used to be, Benjamin?" For once Benjamin consented to break his rule, and he read out to her what was written on the wall. There was nothing there now except a single commandment. It ran, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." I did not seem strange when next day the pigs who were supervising the work of the farm carried whips in their trotters. It did not seem strange to learn that the pigs had brought themselves a wireless set, were arranging to install a telephone, and had taken out subscriptions to John Bull, Titbits, and the Daily Mirror. It did not seem strange when Napoleon was seen strolling in the farm garden with a pipe in his mouth. No, not even when the pigs took Mr. Jones' clothes out of the wardrobes and put them on. Napoleon himself, apparently in a black coat, richer breeches, and leather leggings, while his favorite so appeared in the waterskeet dress with Mrs. Jones. had been used to wear on Sundays. In the afternoon, a number of dog carts drove up to the farm. A deputation of neighboring farmers had been invited to make a tour of inspection. They were shown all of their farm and expressed great admiration for everything they saw, especially the windmill. The animals were wielding the turnip field that worked dignitily, hardly, raised their faces from the ground, and not knowing whether to be more frightened of the pigs or of human visitors. That evening, loud laughter and bursts of singing came from the farmhouse. And suddenly a sound of a mingling voice. The animals were stricken with curiosity. What was happening in there now that, for the first time, the animals and human beings were meeting on terms of equality with one accord? They began to creep as quietly as possible into the farmhouse garden. And I'm going to stop it there to leave you on a cliffhanger. And I am going to say, like and subscribe so we can get to 1,000 subscribers so we can start beekeeping. And stay blessed, make the world a better place, one person and one moment at a time. Bye-bye. Julietta.
Huh?
Boop, boop.